back to Mission-Based Resilience Podcast. We have Brian Conroy, our beloved and honored guest host, or I like to call host, and I'm the guest host. We keep fighting back and forth. And we have a special guest, Dr. Natalie Marr. She's a clinical psychologist all the way from Minnesota, and she's made her career in helping people, and we figured that it would be an incredible experience to have her on board and ask her some questions. And this week's topic is a growth mindset. So Natalie, I don't know, I didn't really give that much of an introduction. So if you want to speak a little bit more about yourself, tell us a little more about yourself, and we'll talk about a growth mindset.
I'm happy to talk about a growth mindset. As you said, I'm a clinical psychologist, and so I've had a private practice, but I've also worked in the public sector in Minnesota, so mostly for state and local, like county government agencies. Community mental health is kind of the training grounds for clinical psychologists. Honestly, that's where we put in our time early in our career and work really hard. So now I have a private practice, work a little less one-on-one with people, do a little bit more teaching for a couple universities, and started a coaching business in 2020. So also doing some online courses and group coaching format, because I love teaching. I've actually found that's more fun in my latter career than the front lines in clinical psych.
So that you said the first part of your career was fairly challenging.
It definitely was challenging. I mean, I worked for our state hospital system for 6 years. So kind of the worst of the worst. These are the individuals that are committed. And I worked for at least half of that in our forensic division. So it was with individuals that would have been in the prison system had they not been civilly committed as mentally ill and dangerous, or sometimes it was chemical health related and dangerous. But essentially, that's how they circumvented being in the DOC. Instead, they were with us. So it was really challenging work for an early clinician. I mean, it also is really great work to see kind of the spectrum of mental health and how far gone it can get when it's not treated. So definitely was a nice foundation for me to have early in my career. And then I went into community mental health after that. And pretty much after starting in the state hospitals, I was like, yeah, you could show me just about anything and it's not going to surprise me at this point. And I've specialized now in interpersonal traumas, relationship traumas, mostly things that have happened to individuals in their childhood and how they impact them as adults now in my private practice, because it just kept showing up in the career that I took.
Right. So if I can jump in, I think it's fascinating. Obviously, Natalie's beginning of her career mirrors the end of your career, or the latter stages. We were not at the end of your career yet, but certainly you came from one place and went into the prisons to help people and create a resilient mindset, et cetera. And Natalie's, the foundation of her work has led her to now be a coach, and I think you both share that. I guess the question I'm sure everybody wants to understand, Natalie, is how did that foundation lead you to be a coach and a professor? Obviously the groups are different. So what was that knowledge base? What were those experiences that kind of help guide you to where you are today?
Well, I'll do you a favor and I'll tie it into the growth mindset, because it really does bump up against that.
Perfect.
But I think one of the things that fascinates me most is what a great percentage of people experience is knowing better. Like they know there's something that's not working in their life. They might even have a pretty detailed understanding of what's not working in their life. But something about it just keeps them trapped and stuck in a cycle. And to me, mindfulness, self-awareness work and growth mindset work has been huge in helping kind of move people across into a state of mind where they can start to use this amazing thing that we have up here with cognitive ability to shift mindset, ability to, with your conscious awareness, really do anything that you set your mind to get over that hump of having what I call the I know betters But I've seen so much of that across my career that it really fascinated me, and I dug into it in the research and the literature, and started to implement practices that I thought, well, shoot, especially as COVID started in 2020, I'm like, there's, not everybody's going to sit across the couch from me, so I probably could be disseminating this in different ways, and letting people pick this stuff up. Because I do think that people want to feel better. I don't think that they want to keep repeating cycles that are not working for them.
Well, it's interesting because I know in my career, the advice I gave a lot of executives, right, coming from the business world, was coach yourself, right? How often do our friends and family and colleagues at work come to us for advice or others, and then we feel, to your words, stuck, because we don't have that, or many of us lack that ability to step back and look objectively at the situation that we're in and give ourselves that good advice that you would give someone else. And so how does that tie in, if it does, to the growth mindset? And what are the things that you teach people to help put them in that situation to help themselves?
Sure. So I start with self-awareness skills building through mindfulness and meditation techniques. And mindfulness is a huge, broad theoretical concept that it really is just about being here in the present moment. So present moment orientation. And so much of what we do in American Western culture is to always be working on whatever the next thing is. We're 3 steps down the line. We're not sitting in the seat that we're in at the moment. And so those techniques are really useful in building up that attentional and focus part of the brain in the medial prefrontal cortex, so that you can do what you were just saying, Brian, which is to kind of take that step back and look at a bigger picture instead of feeling, in it. Like I tell them, it's the back of the hand scale, right? If you're in your life, you can't see the back of your hand, but if you could push back from your life just a bit and have perspective, that helps to give you a little bit, more leverage in what to do in the moment that you're in.
Totally. If you're staring at the bark, it's hard to tell the health of the forest, right?
Right.
But
I think that people get stuck in these cycles, and so they believe that it must just mean that they can't grow. Like there must be something physiologically, neurologically wrong with them, that they just keep dating the same person, for instance, might be a presenting issue that I work with. Like, oh my God, how is it possible that I have the same partner again? And I'm like, well, I think that we need to help you take a little bit more perspective so you can see how you participate in that cycle, and then might make different choices. I don't think that you're stuck in a fixed mindset where you can't shift this. I just think that the things that you've done haven't shifted it yet, because many times we've done the same thing over and over and over.
And you're not aware, to your point. You don't have that sense of mindfulness that allows you to objectively look at the situation as it is, not as you want it to be or wish it were, but as it is.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks.
And Natalie, how do you? Oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, please go.
I was going to say, you talked about self-awareness and mindfulness, and obviously that in my mind, when I think of mindfulness and self-awareness, I think of living in the moment, living centered, concentrating on what's happening right now, and not worrying about what's happening in the future. Obviously, when we're talking about a growth mindset, we're talking about potentially changing and growing and advancing our lives. How do you balance the skill that you need to live in the moment with the skill that you need to plan for the future?
Right. I think it's less about skill and more about building capacity within the individual. And this is where the research and the science is so fascinating to me, that if you look at a bunch of Buddhist monks' brains, they'll wig you out what gets activated when they're in those meditative states. But the University of Wisconsin, Dr. Richard, I'm blanking on his last name, has done a lot of research on helping people kind of build the capacity for mindful thinking, for pushing back and having that observer self. And what we see is it literally does change connectivity in that frontal lobe, and for whatever purpose allows them to be kind of dually fully aware at the same time of what they want in the future, what is happening in the present, what they're informed of from their lived experience in the past, and how you gel that together in what is the next right step. What's the next right step in this moment that I need to take towards that. The thing about, forward thinking goal setting that can get the sticky widget with it, even when we're trying to make smart goals and make them, things that are realistically doable, is they're attached to several steps. And the idea of a mindful growth mindset is you're only responsible for the step that's in front of you, right? And so you're taking all of those things with this observer self perspective, looking at it all, and just deciding that right now that's this step. So I'm just going to do this next right thing.
Yes.
And then we'll see what else comes up, because I might need to course adjust at that point. I'll still have that zeitgeist of, I know my lived experience, I know where I want to head, but I'm only going to be using what's in my present moment to work towards that. I hope that answered your question.
Kind of like a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Like you have a conveyor belt that's way further down, and you have goals that are really far down, but you have the conveyor belt that's like coming at you. You have one goal that's like right there in front of you. You have to focus on that one.
Yes.
And not worry about the thing that's 100 yards down the conveyor belt.
Right. Because 100 yards down could be multiple results, multiple ways.
And it's not linear, right? I think that
Exactly.
the thing that trips most people up in these situations is that the progress is not linear, and we all live in a three-dimensional world. And the best way I got to understand it when I was a younger man was not that I'm a physicist at all, I was humanities guy, but the Heisenberg principle, which is the idea that any particle in movement in space is traveling, has a point and a direction, so three characteristics, but you can only measure two at a time, right? Because you can either know exactly where it is, but you can't know where it's going or how fast it's moving, or you can measure how fast it's moving. And so I think when I got my head around that, it helped me as a person understand that, I think you just said it so well. You can look at it in the future, but you got to just figure out where you are now, because there's so many things moving around you. You're moving through space, space is moving around you, and that, that's okay, right? That is part of it, and getting comfortable with that and understanding that, we can't build a 10-step business plan over 5 years and have it go well, because we don't know what's going to happen over 5 years, right?
Right.
And so professionally, personally, whatever the case may be, getting, what do they call it in the military, Ed? A VUCA environment, right? The things always changing.
Yeah.
So how do
only thing that's constant is change, right?
That's right. And once you need to get comfortable with that as a person. I think your concept, I started reading Taoism and really focusing on that as a way to be mindful and centered and recognize that you can only control so much, and you have to let everything flow. And I think that's all speaking to the same lesson, right? Which is letting go to a certain extent. And that's hard for people, right?
It's really hard. The other part that is fascinating about, and I'm glad you brought up physics, because I also think of it in that capacity. Quantum physics will talk about how there's wave theory and particle theory, and there's this place at which they merge, and it's what you're referring to there. So there's like wave theory being, there's all sorts of potential out there in the future, but as soon as the observer looks at one part of that, then it collapses into actual manifested state. And so I think that's where I get so curious about, like, well, so how powerful is this conscious awareness thing? Like, can we really like create our future? And then you have a lot of people that preach to that, that fact and coach on that fact and have created whole programs around that. So it's so fascinating to me that really humanity has this powerful tool, but all of cultural programming and conditioning is kind of teaching us out of it instead of towards it. Instead of controlling your conscious awareness, it's like, okay, let's pull up Facebook and there's this happening, and Twitter and there's this. I mean, like, we're constantly being drawn in too many directions. And so we're not training that part of our mind to stay in present moment orientation and only looking at the step that's right in front of us.
Well, and I think it goes back, you just kind of nailed with a lot more physics discussion than Ed and I have ever had together. But, the idea that, resilience is so important in order to be your best self. And I'm a huge believer in, positivity sits at the center of that, right? Because how can you manifest good things if you're constantly focusing on the negative or what could go wrong? A certain part of our being, I think, wants to exude positivity, and positivity leads to resilience, through optimism, right? Because if you're optimistic and you're positive, it's a heck of a lot easier to be resilient, and it's a higher probability that you're going to be your best self if you're dwelling on the negative or the worries and concerns about what could or couldn't happen in the future. So we just gone from quantum physics to resilience training.
Resilience training. I love it.
To do that.
I love it. It's all connected. It's all connected.
It seriously is. I mean, that's you could. It's a rabbit hole that you can keep going down if you want to, but it's endlessly fascinating to me. And one of the things that I point out to people is when our mindset shifts to more positive or a gratefulness practice or something of that nature, the other feature of that is cognitive bias comes into play. It's this, feature of our brain where to be efficient, it does what we tell it to do. So if I tell you to look around the room and name 5 things you see that are blue, it will do that. If I tell you to close your eyes and tell me 5 things that are red, it may or may not have picked up on that, right? Because cognitive bias works. And so if you tell your brain to see positive, it will, because both positive and negative are in the environment. I mean, it's all there all at the same time. It's about your focus. It's about where are you placing that.
And you brought up earlier, but the social media today focuses on the negatives, right? Because the negatives draw clicks, and clicks drive revenues. And we live, and that's not just the young people. We all live in this world that we're inundated with sensationalism, negativity, et cetera, that really begins to really pull back on that positivity and chip away at resilience. So good on you for all the work that you're doing to push back on that unfortunately pervasive mindset that exists today in the world.
Yeah, I really strongly suggest that people, take media into consideration in their self-care, like how much exposure and what kind of exposure you allow yourself to have. Because while it's fascinating that we can pick up the phone and know what's happening across the world, because it's literally a computer in our pocket, our human evolutionary process and emotional capacity was not built to be able to know what was happening halfway across the earth, right? And so now that we can do that and are doing that, have we emotionally and through our own agility caught up to that? I don't think so. And so I think it harms more people than it helps. And that's why depression rates are way up and anxiety rates are way up. I don't think it's because all of a sudden clinical psychologists and mental health therapists decide to diagnose more. I think that it's really happening, but it's really happening in conjunction with some of these technological advances that they've just taken us too far for what our bodies were made for.
Yeah, and it's just the inundation of negativity, right? I mean, I've read studies about, I'll get the numbers wrong, but something like people with a positive mindset have a 40% less chance of suffering a heart attack than if you have a negative mindset. Yeah. I mean, it's clinically, whether the number's 40, it's I don't have it to hand, but it's a profound difference. It's on my website.
A profound difference. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like you read things like this and you just say, wake up, and I know it's hard, right? It's not easy for everybody, but like your growth mindset, wake up every day trying to be better. Trying to start positive, see the good in things. I love what you talked about too, in that kind of grateful mindset, right? Be grateful for the things we have. Too often we spend too much time worrying about the things we don't have.
Right. And then, we're in a world where we feel powerless and helpless to do something. Whereas when you focus on being grateful for what is already here, that reinforces your own agency. So again, those are, other skill sets that marry up with that growth mindset. If I think I can change and I have the agency to change, then what will I do? I probably will continue to grow across my lifetime.
Absolutely.
So Natalie, with the growth mindset, the steps, just so our viewers are kind of, maybe if they're taking notes, hopefully they are. You said the first step is you do self-awareness and self-care. That's the first step. And then the second step is building the capacity for planning your life and looking into the future.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do after that? I mean, let's break it down to like three steps, just so it's easy. Self-care, I was going to say self-actualization, but self-care.
I'll do it in 4.
Okay, do it. Yeah, we'll try to do it as little steps as possible.
Yeah, because my
one is
coaching program
self-awareness.
is 5, and the 5th step is growth mindset, and so all of them kind of dovetail into that. But I start with self-awareness, which is mindfulness practices at first to build capacity. I actually introduce some of Dr. Kristen Neff's work and Dr. Brene Brown's work on self-compassion and shame resiliency after that, because I find that people who don't have a kind and understanding view of what they're noticing in their life will double down on the old habits, right? So instead of stepping out and not participating in our suffering, we don't like what we see and we almost hide from it. Is kind of an automatic human response. So the two of those together then become compassionate self-awareness. But I spend a lot of time on both because they really are a capacity building foundation in what I teach. Then we move into what I talked about with making those choices, kind of staying present moment oriented, noticing what's the programming and conditioning around me, and choosing for yourself what's best, what you want, what actually serves you. Because just what you've been doing doesn't necessarily serve you. And then I introduce self-care, and I do that strategically because I don't think people know what self-care is. I think they think it's, things we do to not stay stressed or to escape if we have a lot of stress in our life. Self-care is actually the things that we're doing to replenish and replace energy and to shore up energy in our life so that we want to stay in it, not to escape from it. So self-care for the purpose of escape to me is not self-care. Self-care is about, okay, if you have a stressful life, what are the things you're doing to replenish and shore up so you stay in that stressful life and start to make the changes that make it less stressful. But if you're escaping from that, that's not going to help you. And then you need those things to kind of move into that growth mindset, which is really about emotional agility, flexible thinking, and understanding that, life is change and change is loss. And so you're going to have to kind of learn to equally hold space for grieving what isn't and taking on what's new.
And there is no change without, or there's no growth without change, right?
There isn't.
Yeah. We have to
there's
embrace
no
that.
And there's no amount of change that is comfortable and familiar. Like that, the whole point of a growth edge is it's going to be uncomfortable. So you're going to have that flexibility and emotional agility to get through it.
But it all starts with little bits, right?
Bits.
Something Ed and I talk about a lot, right? Is that in order to, what's the old saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? So getting comfortable with little change builds the platform to allow yourself to be resilient with big change, whether it's proactive change that you drive or whether it's reactive change that occurs to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't done the work on the little stuff, you'll never get the big stuff.
You'll never get to the big stuff. Well, it's all little stuff in that way, right? When we're in this moment, making the next right step, it is just a cycling of small steps that make huge differences when you do the pushback and look at the whole big picture.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah. Thanks.
Self-care. I all I can think of is an example so our viewers will understand the difference between escaping, taking care of yourself, escaping, and then actually doing something that helps you to face your whatever it is that you're trying to face, right? So an example would be, I won't be extreme like jumping into 52-degree water, which I do on a daily basis. But let's just say you went for a run, right? To escape your stress, and you just went for a run. That's not self-care, right? But going for a run with someone and working issues out and talking your issues out with that someone, or maybe getting on the phone with you as a clinical psychologist while you're running. I don't know if some of your clients probably do that. Maybe they do. I don't know. But
more and more, I meet people in all sorts of places nowadays.
That is a great example of self-care, right? You take care of yourself by unlocking the obstacles that are in your way instead of just turning your back on those obstacles and running away from them and blowing off steam, the traditional stress relief stuff that people say, hey, just go out and, retail therapy. That's not self-care.
Well, I don't know much about retail therapy, but I know a little bit about running. And as an avid runner,
you do know a lot about running, don't you?
Yeah, and I think that is funny because one of the things that I was thinking about when Natalie was talking was, running for me is self-care because I run in the mornings. It allows me to think. It allows me that quiet time to stay centered. I've tried meditation, doesn't work for me. What works for me better than anything else in the world is a long run. And it makes me feel good about myself. So again, creates that positivity. I've done something hard, which means that it creates the mindset that I can do other things that are difficult during that day, and it centers me. So I don't run to, run away from things. I run to center myself and prepare myself and be more positive. And I think the key there is it's different for everybody. And oftentimes people are looking for that elixir or that lightning bolt, and you're going to try different things. Ed knows I stopped running for a while from doctor's orders, and I was miserable. And so I said to my wife, I said, you know what, we're going to run again. But I think that's you're right, Ed. You can't run away from something. Going to have alcohol to relieve your stress isn't the answer. Having a beer with a great buddy, that can be a different outcome, right? It's understanding paradigms and how are they additive or are they pulling you away from that self-centered growth mindset. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I love that you guys are showing it in juxtaposition with the same running as at the center, right? Because it's not about the content of what you're doing in the self-care. It's about the intention that gets set. And so if it's to, center yourself, that's a mindful practice. I hate to tell you, Brian, but it is. So meditation doesn't work for you, but that does.
Recognize that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, then it's replenishing, then it's giving you more energy. But if you're doing it to run away from your wife because you don't want to see her in the morning, that's not a self-care.
She does appreciate when I leave the house now that I'm retired, by the way, but that's a separate issue.
That's something
awesome.
else.
This is great.
Yeah,
awesome.
Ed. Well, thank you, Natalie. Again,
thank you,
Natalie,
guys.
Dr. Natalie Marr is a clinical psychologist out of Minnesota, but she does have her own coaching practice nationwide. So if you want to contact her, Natalie, do you want to give a plug for your podcast and your website?
Yeah. So my website is learntoloveyourstory.com. And if you want to listen to my podcast, it's specifically for women in midlife presently, but I am actually going to be starting a second one, but it's called Midlife Crisis to a Centered Life Thriving. And you can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Natalie. Thank you very much. It's been an honor having you. And Brian, as always, he's just going to go and run like 100 miles. He's being very humble. He runs like hundreds of miles. It's like a race, like a triple marathon or something, or an ultra.
Yeah, 4 ultras.
No, thank you.
4 ultras back to back. Yeah.
4 marathons. 4 marathons.
Wow, that is something to be really proud of.
Yeah,
Goodness.
He's being humble. So when he goes, I go running, it's like my knees and my ankles start to cringe just from him. I'll just be on my bike. I'll be on my bicycle behind him.
That's right. Whatever it takes.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for watching. And I think next week we may have a surprise. I haven't even told Brian yet. Next week we may have an inmate. Well, he's not an inmate anymore. He was from class 7 of my resilience inmate program. He was class 7, and now we're up to class 23. So this is years and years ago. He's
wow, cool.
He's an incredible success, and we're gonna have him on our podcast next week. So he's definitely a character from Miami. So he's a great guy, but super successful businessman now who has 7 or 8 people working for him, and just his story is unbelievable. So you don't want to miss next week's podcast. It's going to be a great story.
Awesome.
So thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you guys for both having me on.